Now, usually I don't tell super old stories here, but this week marks the anniversary of something huge. Something that was so shocking and horrifying that it inspired books, movies, and even songs. From Amityville. This week in 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. killed his entire family, his 2 parents and his 4 siblings, in an inexplicably violent rage, and the tremors of this crime were felt for years. Today, I'm telling you the real-life true story behind the cult phenomenon that is the Amityville Horror, the real story of the DeFeo family murders. Welcome to the anniversary. Shwa-na-na-na, 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 shwa-na-na-na. We're going to start after the murders in December 1975 for just a sec. The Lutz family moved into their new home. 28 days later, the entire family fled in terror. That is the jacket for the Amityville Horror, the best-selling book by Jay Anson that was released in 1977. What's so interesting about this tale, about everything to do with the Amityville house, is that usually after a murder, the site's said to be haunted by ghosts of those who died there, by the victims. But the Amityville house, the Lutzes, and paranormal researchers who studied the house after claimed that the house wasn't haunted in a traditional sense. Instead, the house was possessed by evil spirits. The same evil spirits that they claim possessed Ronald DeFeo Jr. to shoot his entire family 13 months before the Lutzes moved in. Now, this story isn't about ghost sightings, it's not about evil possessions of the devil living in a home. It's not about Ryan Reynolds or the film that he was in. It isn't even about that Eminem song. On November 3rd, 1974, at about 6:30 p.m, Ronald DeFeo Jr., who was 23 years old, burst into Henry's bar. It was in the small town of Amityville in Long Island, New York, and the bar was super close to the DeFeo family home. He was shouting that someone had shot his mum and dad. This town was a quiet, friendly town, but it was also known to have mafia connections. I mean, it's New York in the 70s. A few of the people at the bar, some of his friends, and also a man called Joe Yeswit, took Ronald back to his family home, which was 112 Ocean Avenue, and the house was quiet. The only thing they could hear was the dog barking. Joe called the police. They searched the house and they found 6 members of the family dead in their beds. It wasn't just Ronald Sr. and his wife Louise. It was John and Mark, who were 9 and 11 years old, and Allison and Dawn, who were 13 and 18 years old, Ronald Jr.'s siblings, who were also dead. All the bodies were found face down in their beds with bullet wounds in their heads. Each of the kids had been shot once and the adults had been shot twice. At first, it was thought that the murder had mafia connections, and Ronald Jr. was brought to the police station for his own protection. His story was that his dad, who owned like a car business, was in the mafia world somehow, and a dude called Louis Fulani put out the hit on his family. But throughout the night, Ronald Jr.'s story twisted and it turned, and it became completely unrecognizable from the one that he had first told people and the detectives who were investigating the case. Even his alibi of being at work during the murders was dismantled under the police scrutiny. At the station, this is the original story that he gave. He'd been off work sick the previous day, but in the morning he'd felt better, gone to help his granddad at the dealership that was owned by his dad, but there wasn't much work for him there. He went home around lunchtime. He realised he'd forgotten his house key. There was no one home to let him in. So he went to Henry's, that bar, hung out there, and he returned home in the evening to find his family murdered. He claimed that his father had been in business of organised crime, botched a job, and this was their retaliation. There were a lot of details in Ronald Jr.'s story, and I think that's where the initial suspicion from the police came from. Under questioning, he changed his story each time, but every version included a mafia hitman. But none of the versions of the story actually fit with the evidence that was found at the house and the facts of the case. Before the night was out, Ronald DeFeo Jr. confessed. He said that once he started, he just couldn't stop, that the killings went so fast. He admitted that he had shot his parents and his siblings as they slept in their beds. He also admitted that after killing his family, he took a bath. He redressed before going to work to set his alibi. He pointed the police to where he had discarded his rifle and his bloodstained clothes. And one of the things that stuck with me when researching this case, when going through all the documentaries and stuff, was that he killed his family at about 3 a.m. But he didn't get help until 15 hours later. He continued as if his life was normal. As in, he went to his girlfriend's house, he hung out, he went to the bar, he had a couple of drinks, while his family, his brothers and sisters, mum and dad, the youngest one, 9 years old, were dead in their beds at home. One of the things that I forgot to add while filming this is that Ronald Jr. had a severe drug problem. He spent a lot of the day after murdering his family high on heroin. Funnily enough, this wasn't one of the defences that his defence lawyers used in the trial. Instead, they went for insanity, but we'll get to that in just a bit. He, of course, was arrested immediately and awaited his trial. On November 21st, 1975, he was found guilty on all 6 counts of second-degree murder. And it was second degree because that's defined as intentional murder that lacks premeditation. It was the motive that was just so hard for anyone to understand. There was some anger between father and son. They fought frequently. They often came to blows. One time he punched his sister when she was walking up the stairs randomly and she fell down them. A year before the murders, he had pulled a gun on his dad, pulled the trigger, but it misfired. Whilst the motive is something that has never actually been found when it comes to the Amityville murders, and I think that's part of the reason why this case spawned so much interest and became so infamous, because who in their right mind, nobody of course in their right mind, would kill their siblings and their parents? He was still found guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 6 sentences of 25 years to life, so 6 consecutive life sentences in prison. It was 13 months later that the Lutz family purchased the home. Of course, it was extremely reduced in price because of the murders, and they only lasted 28 days. Their spine-tingling tales of paranormal activity are what propelled the legend of the Amityville horror, and that's what spawned the documentaries, the films, the books, and so on. Since his conviction, though, Ronald DeFeo Jr., I call him by his full name, but everyone who knew him called him Butch, has given several varying accounts of how the killings were carried out. In an interview in 1986, so 12 years later, for Newsday, he claimed that his sister Dawn killed their father, and then his mother killed the rest of the siblings, and then he killed his mother. He said that he took the blame because he didn't want to say anything bad about his family. In 1990, he filed a 440 motion, which was a proceeding to have his conviction vacated. In support of this motion, he asserted that Dawn and an unknown assailant who fled the house before he could get a good look at him killed their parents. He said that he killed Dawn accidentally because they struggled over a rifle. He also says that he was married at the time of the murders to a woman named Geraldine. He said he was living in New Jersey and his mum asked him over to the home to break up a fight, and that's when he drove there with Geraldine's brother, and Geraldine's brother was there. He could verify the story and he didn't kill anybody. There isn't actually any evidence that he was married. I couldn't find any. You know, you can shout at me in the comments, but I couldn't find any evidence of him being married, but that's a story that he told anyway. Adding one final thing that I forgot to during the recording. Come on, Yinka. None of Ronald Jr.'s accounts since he's been convicted make much sense. If him and his sister were fighting over a rifle, why was she found face down in her bed? If the mum killed the kids in a rage, why was she found face down in her bed? I should probably tell you, though, that at his trial, his lawyer attempted an insanity defense. He claimed that he heard voices that told him to kill his family, and of course that is also where the horror and the legends of the home being haunted stemmed from. I think that it's very easy to get caught up in the folklore of a story like this. When you have a horror series based on it, you've got books based on it, you've got a potential Native American burial ground, which that myth has been debunked, by the way. All of these things add for the craziness that horrors are based on. But ultimately, this story is about a family who lost their lives and about Ronald DeFeo Jr., who was a family annihilator. He killed 4 of his siblings, aged 9, 11, 13, and 18, and then killed his parents as well, for what seems like absolutely no reason. I don't think that he was possessed by ghosts, demons, ghouls, or goblins. But that's the story of the Amityville horror. And I want to finish by telling you that as of November 2020, Ronald DeFeo Jr. is held in the Sullivan Correctional Facility in the town of Fallsburg, New York. All of his appeals and requests to the parole board to date have been denied. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next week.